You are listening to the Small Town Big Arts podcast. I'm your host, Jeffrey Kirshner, the CEO of the Academy Center of the Arts in Lynchburg, Virginia. In my own work as an arts leader, I have found it difficult to access resources for arts organizations and artists serving smaller communities. On each episode, Small Town Big Arts sets out to drive conversations and provide inspiration for those serving smaller communities through the arts. If you like what you hear, please rate and review us and share with your friends and colleagues who are working to promote the arts in smaller communities across America. You can also learn more by visiting us at smalltownbigarts.com. Well, welcome to this month's episode. This month, we're switching up the format some. Previous episodes, if you want to go back through the library of episodes, have focused on particular organizations across the United States doing work in smaller communities. I definitely encourage you to go back and take a listen to those podcasts. But I've reached a moment that I've decided that I'm going to take some inspiration from some biweekly meetings that I have with a colleague of mine who's about an hour down the road in Roanoke, Virginia. And we've been meeting biweekly since COVID over Zoom. And our discussions are wide-ranging, but we serve as friends and colleagues to one another and helping us navigate the difficulty, the terrain that we find ourselves in a smaller community running art centers. And so today I wanted to bring in this colleague, Cyrus Pace, who's the executive director of the Jefferson Center. He brings a unique vision to nonprofit management, having functioned equally well in the business community as an educator and as a performer. He has self-produced 3 albums, and as an educator, he was the coordinator of the fine arts for the Roanoke City Public School System, where he facilitated a VH1 Save the Music grant for 18 elementary schools, bringing $450,000 worth of instruments into the hands of children. Cyrus Pace received a bachelor's degree in sociology from Roanoke College and a master's degree in jazz performance from Manhattan School of Music. He is an adjunct professor of music at Virginia Tech. So Cyrus, really glad to have you here today. And the work that you do with the Jefferson Center is really, really incredible. If you maybe want to take a moment and share with us a little bit about you, anything we've missed in the bio, but a little bit too about the Jefferson Center itself and the city of Roanoke.
Sure. The bio was good. That's the embarrassing part, but I appreciate you doing it. I might mention, too, right out of high school, I went in the Navy band, rather than going right into college, which I hated it at the time, but in retrospect, has been sort of an important part of the bio for me. It gets you through some things in your resume that board of directors might sometimes wonder about someone with a master's degree in jazz guitar, Like, is this person going to be able to be on time to things? Like, they see the
Navy gets that.
Yeah, see the Navy thing. Like, well, he's probably going to be okay. If he made it through boot camp, he's going to be fine. But on Jefferson Center, it's a 100-year-old building that was originally a high school. It was the major high school in Roanoke. And about late 1980s, the alumni got together. It had been shuttered since the early 70s. Some alumni got together and decided they wanted to save the building. Now, a lot of folks don't know this, but the initial stage of it was really just about saving the building and putting some commercial spaces in there, so commercial leasing. And we still, to this day, have 25 tenants in the building, for-profit and non-profit. The second stage is when they realized there was a hall in the middle of it, right? And that's the part of our history where people start thinking of us as an arts organization. So we went from a foundation that the Articles of Incorporation said, was founded to save a historic building in the city of Roanoke, to being about programming and outreach through education, and it's really about music. So it's a 900-seat hall, 120-seat club room. We've got multiple short-term rental spaces too for parties and other kind of events, as you'd imagine. So we're in that weird kind of in between being a performing arts center and also just being a community center, right? So the most visible part of what we do, of course, is the programming and the educational outreach through our music lab and through that program. But on the finance side, a big part of what we do, of course, is commercial leasing. On a $2 million operational budget, commercial leasing is $400,000. Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of us making sense of our world. So a lot of people say, man, what a great job you have in the arts, and I often think I'm in the business of building management. And commercial leasing.
Yeah. It's funny because at the Academy Center of the Arts where I am, we talk a lot about this when we talk, but so much of our activity and the way we function and operate on a daily basis are these third parties, and certainly known for presenting work, but it's those third parties that really help make it go. Um, so I wanted to bring Cyrus into this episode because there is a common theme that comes up in a lot of Cyrus and I's discussions, and this is in and around our facilities. And the facilities, I will begin, we both have some really incredible facilities, both of a historic nature. Cyrus's theater is 900, ours is 800, both historic landmarks. And but the timetable too of the renovations of our two theaters is about 20 years apart. And so very often in talking to Cyrus, it's I have the benefit of a little bit of looking into the future and seeing the pressures that the maintenance and upkeep of such a facility can put on the mission delivering side of an arts organization. So what I wanted to talk with today, because there's a lot to share here and there's a lot to dissect, and Cyrus and I are coming at this from two different places. Cyrus is in a situation, and he'll get more into this in a moment, but Cyrus is in a situation where the city of Roanoke owns the building in which he's in, and we'll get to a little bit about what that looks like. We're in a situation where the city of Lynchburg does not own our building. We own the building. And that's a different space that we sort of operate in, and we'll go into that today. I wanted to start a bit though before we get into some of the trials and tribulations of what we deal with, is to get into some of the advantages of the buildings. So, if you would, tell us a little bit about what's great about the building, what advantages you all have in that space in Roanoke.
Yeah, well, one thing I sort of mentioned already is multiple revenue streams. I've got commercial leasing. I've got event spaces for weddings and chamber meetings and other kinds of events. So that stabilizes the budget on some level. The bulk of the upfits that we have done in the performance spaces were done under our last campaign, which we finished about 5 years ago. So I feel like our performance spaces are really updated and are in really good shape and sound really, really good. Mm-hmm. I'd also say there's a benefit in both of our cases that the size of our venues is exactly right for the size of market that we're in.
Yeah, I agree with that.
If you've got a symphony, they're in a market this size, they're not likely to sell 1,800 or 2,000 seats to a major symphony work.
Yeah.
So a 800, 900 seat venue makes a lot more sense for that. That would be true for opera too. It'd be true for local ballet companies. It would be true for children's theater, right? And the good news is if they decide that they can beat 850 seats, they just do 2 shows.
Mm-hmm.
They'll do a matinee and an evening, or they'll do two nights. So that's the upside. I think the 2 venue sizes we have are exactly right for the size of our community.
And tell everybody about your second venue too, because that might be good to.
Sure. I mean, I think in the industry, arts industry, or the theater industry, you'd consider it a black box in the sense that it is a box and it's dark because of the curtains, but it really is set up to be a club room with a stage permanently on one side and the sound system permanently on the other, and lighting for mostly music. And we do a lot of stuff in there, but most of what we do is sort of like a jazz club type feeling in the room.
Yeah.
With bistro tables, and people come in, and we always have dessert out, and it's sort of a nice way to bring artists, musicians down from New York City or Philadelphia or up from Miami that you don't have to travel to those places to see. We bring them here and do concerts with them, usually a 7 o'clock and a 9 o'clock show.
Yeah, and I know that we find for us we have a second space too. We have a warehouse, black box theater space, and certainly in regards to both our own needs from a programming standpoint as well as community needs, there are just going to be things that are just 800 seats, 900 seats is just going to be too much. And so, and in smaller communities, that's going to be pretty routine. One thing that we find for us too is the asset does a tremendous amount for us. The visibility of the building for us too is huge. This is a historic landmark. It's really beautiful. People notice it when they're downtown, so it serves as a beacon. And people sometimes they get frustrated with that being kind of the summation of who we are, is this building, but it still creates a high profile for us. And certainly for us too, and I know this is the case for you all, we are able to supply a need to the wider community and the infrastructure of all these other arts organizations within our community by having this facility, having a team that can run and operate that facility, and providing that for them when they really cannot do that within their own budgets. And so that in terms of our own like value proposition is really huge. Whenever we go out and even do our own fundraising, very often we wave that flag. So I think speaking to those in smaller communities, either who have a building or thinking of taking on a building, these are certainly things. And I think to Cyrus's point too, there's additional revenue opportunities and third party use of the space and renting that space. I think there's often I'm kind of curious, Cyrus, how you deal with this, but how do you manage the collision that can sometimes come with the revenue that can be earned from a third party rental and the mission of the organization to be an art, to be delivering arts to the community?
It is the whole thing, really, in a sense. 12 years ago, I probably would have just thought, well, that's just calendar management, but it is brand management. It's, in our case, we think of ourselves as a presenting organization that operates within a performing arts center we're also responsible for, right? So we'll do 30 of our own concerts a year in the classic presenting way, right? We're calling it agency, booking an act through a formal offer sheet, having them come in, and in our case, again, doing that under a sort of a subscription package, although that's starting to wane, and that may not be... That's a long conversation.
Yeah,
we may not be having
that might be
today.
another one we can have for another episode.
Yeah, but not surprising to anyone, the subscriber base is changing and getting smaller. So, but what we've done recently, and I would encourage this for anybody, is we actually went and looked at a weekend of a rental from one of our community partners and did a to the dollar analysis of the actual net revenue we generated off of it, because as you know, the cost to hire security and production staff has gone up exponentially in the last couple of years, but we haven't been able to necessarily directly apply those upcharges instantly with those third parties, predominantly because they're contracted 18 months out, right? So,
and they're having their own struggles.
And we're seeing those ticket sales come through our box office and have some level of concern for many of those using our facility. So it really is about, in purely financial terms, we think our presenting, even though it needs a bulk of underwriting to make sense of it, probably nets out better, strangely enough, than some of the rentals.
It's interesting because we've found a bit of the opposite. And that also might be because I'll also share that I think Cyrus is better at talent than we are. And that's real. Like, I think we are still very green and probably the way we structure some of the performances financially is not as savvy as Cyrus. But we find on the flip side that we that we do a little bit better financially from the third parties. But with that said, some of that also might be, our pull towards that also might be the psychology of it feeling safer. It's like it's guaranteed, right? We know how much money we're getting largely. I mean, there's going to be some variation in fees, and there's going to be some in terms of ticketing fees, and there's going to be some variation in concessions revenue and such. But largely, like, we know we're going to walk out. We're not going to be losing any money, and there's always the risk in presenting that you could walk out in the hole.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely, riskier.
Yeah.
At the same time, if you are negotiating the deal structures, if you're on the radar with the agencies and they're thinking of you when they've got someone routed through. And I'd also add, after 22 years of programming, we've got folks who are coming to stuff, right?
Yeah,
like they
established.
Yeah, I think that takes probably 10 years to establish a relationship to a presenting organization in that way. But we're also probably finding the sweet spot in terms of the type of artist and the level at which we're booking them. I'll use one recent example, Lyle Lovett. His artist fee made sense for what we could charge in our market based on the night of the week he was willing to play and that we had a date available, and based on the fact that it sold out, that one probably netted some positive. It netted some positive revenue for us. And again, that means that show makes sense without the benefit of underwriting that we would have applied to almost every other show we do. sort of swinging back to the building conversation. In the end, however, all of this stuff needs underwriting because we're going to have to figure out a way to take care of the capital infrastructure over time. So when I say net positive, right, this show is in the black. Nothing that we do is going to cover long-term capital needs.
Yeah, that might be a good segue too.
Yeah, none of it's going to do that.
So this is a good segue because I think, as much as we want to keep this rainbows and sunshine, there's a harsh reality to owning and maintaining these facilities and what that means in the nonprofit arts sector in America, and particularly in smaller communities. And so I think I'll start by sharing a story about the genesis of the Academy Center of the Arts in Lynchburg that I run. It is the product of a merger, and in previous episodes in which we discussed the fundraising around the building and the actual execution of the renovation, we get a little bit into this. But as anybody who's listened to this podcast, a bit of a reminder. So there was the Lynchburg Fine Arts Center that was located near our general hospital in Lynchburg. And that Fine Arts Center opened in 1962. It was done with all private money, significantly cheaper than even taking out the passage of time, and significantly cheaper than the renovation that we did with the Academy. And that building stood there until 2003, at which point the building was under such disrepair, and the financial the funds necessary to maintain that building were just out of reach from the organization. The organization was moving from budget to budget, year to year, just scraping by, in some situations not, and just could not both deliver the mission as well as maintain the building. One of my favorite things from the story of the Fine Arts Center too was that at the time that it was built, at the U.S. Capitol in Congress, our local congressman in Lynchburg touted how fantastic it was that this building was built with no public support. And then fast forward 2003, and that building is a parking lot because there was no public support. So these things sort of live together. But and there are certainly things we could get into the operating model of the Fine Arts Center and things that they were doing that if I went back to it, I would say, hey guys, you might want to think about doing this a little bit differently. But regardless of any of that, they were not able to maintain that building. And so I want to talk a little bit about the strain and stress and push and pull that happens to us in maintaining these public spaces while also fulfilling mission. So I wonder if, Cyrus, let's talk a little bit about a little bit of the history of the restoration and the conversion of the building. But in particular, I want to really focus on the city ownership, because I think probably there are people out in the field right now who are in circumstances where they are navigating local government and the buildings that they occupy. And there's lots of different arrangements, and we'll get into that too. But share a little bit about the relationships you all have to the city of Roanoke.
Sure. So it is often the case when a city entity grants a building to a 501c3 to operate it, multiple LLCs are set up to manage historic tax credits and help fund the initial upfit. And then, of course, there's a lot of private fundraising that happens at the same time, classic public-private partnership, right? In our case, the founding board signed an agreement with the city of Roanoke, which stated specifically that the foundation and its aligning LLCs would be 100% responsible for any capital needs in the building over the 40-year life of that lease. And from my perspective, that was the primary and initial acute mistake that has resulted in us being at a point now, 30 years into founding and 24 years into the use of the historic theater part of what we do. That's caused a situation where, we're looking at $6 to $8 million in deferred capital needs, most of which have been defined as critical or urgent, meaning they have to be done for the safety and ongoing viability of the work we're doing.
There's no choice.
There's no choice. And as we talk about oftentimes, that's going to be the same for you or whether it belongs to the city or county it's in. Good really good consultants in this environment that might walk into a community that says, we've got this old middle school and we'd really like to save it and do something great. What does that look like? A really good consultant would sit with a plan that includes the exact known loss of operating that building over a period of time.
Yeah.
Exactly how much that community, the public entity, is going to have to give to this idea over this period of time. Because if you're not doing that, you should be having a conversation about lifespan. And let me even put a sharper edge on it. You should be sitting with donors and saying, we'd like you to give $1 million to save this hall, but we also want you to know it will only stay open for 20 years.
Yeah.
Because our planning right now doesn't represent.
Doesn't take us past that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that would be responsible, right? We want you to know that it's important to invest in this. And the good news is I'm going to do 20 years of programming that people are going to celebrate. It's going to be the most important thing happening in the Lynchburg News and Advance or the Roanoke Times. People are not going to believe what we're going to get in here. We're going to do that so exceptionally well that people move to this community because they can't believe how great it is to be here, to be able to go for a hike in the evening and then walk over and see Branford Marsalis, right? It's going to be amazing. But we are only going to do it for 20 years.
And then it's done.
It's done. Because
it's so interesting. I find, and we'll talk a little bit of the Academy story in a bit. And Cyrus was not with the organization 22 years ago when this is done. But I do think very often the knowledge that exists with the genesis of these facilities, these organizations, right? That there's this sort of like, well, if you run the business, quote unquote, properly, then you'll be able to cover the costs and upkeep of the building and keep up with depreciation. And our CFO always likes to say we don't make widgets, right? It's like there's a how the financials work for these organizations, right? There's just a limit, right, to what we can draw in, how much money we can raise from our community, how many tickets we can sell if there's only 900 seats.
Yeah, but you said two things that are really important. One is the fact that we daily fight against the perspective that if we just operated more efficiently,
right,
we'd be able to capture this extra operating income and save it, right? If we just had 2 less positions, then we'd have a surplus income that we could put in an account, right? That's the first thing. The second thing...
Well, speak to that really quick before you go off that, Cyrus. Why can't we? Because I know that we can't, but speak a little bit to why we can't.
Yeah, so I have never worked in any industry with more efficiency than the efficiency of trying to operate a theater. Right. First of all, there's a cultural part of it where theater people already assume they're going to be there 60 or 70 hours a week or 80 or 90.
Yeah, they're already working overtime.
Yeah, and that's not good, as we know. You can't do that for 50 years. You can't do that for 20 years. That's sort of one part of it. The other reason is we're not a business that can instantly capitalize. Right. The grant process takes 12 to 16 months. So in the for-profit world, you could generate an idea, maybe incubate it, take it to a group of investors and get funded in 3 to 6 months. And then it's probably gone in 12 months if it didn't actually generate profit. In our world, it doesn't work that way. So it's very difficult to instantly capitalize ideas, So it's never going to generate that kind of immediate return, and it's never going to generate that sort of long-term return. So it's not just about the structure of the nonprofit sector and what we're selling and what we're doing, but it's already most of the time as efficient as it can be.
Yeah. We've already stretched our staff and team, and I will share. We really made a commitment post-COVID to properly. We keep referring to it as properly staffing the organization. And it's a bit of an experiment because we're trying to see if in doing so, right, then we can create the level of value, in what we deliver, to close the gap. And so far the experiment is moving along, but it's going to be razor thin, right? I mean, we're going to be tight, and this is not, this isn't, Facebook or Twitter that had all these employees and maybe it was questionable and they could shave off something. Like, these folks are working, as you said, they're working overtime already. They're already pushed. And that's even with what we are saying properly, fully staffed. So there really is no room to cut unless we want the value of our services to go down. And in which case, if the value of the services goes down, then our donors to give less, People are coming to less things. They're taking less classes. They're just engaging on a much lower level, and then it becomes a spiral that
It does.
you can't get out of.
And it would be the same, which is the real pressure in terms of the infrastructure of your building.
Yeah.
The common area carpet is dilapidated and subscribers are tripping as they're coming off the elevator. So it's kind of a, pretty dramatic, but it's happened recently.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's very specific, Cyrus. So imagine.
So, we're talking about people coming into a venue to see Wynton Marsalis and Jazz at Lincoln Center, not feeling like the building itself represents the quality of what's happening on the stage,
Yeah.
The other thing, back to the efficiencies that people believe exist or could generate excess capital, money to save to take care of the building is one of the issues. But the other issue is in the founding. What we also say is you need a lot of hope when you're trying to raise $10 million to save a historic theater. And that's true.
Yeah.
But what you also need is a lot of business planning that is clear on the fact that, it's in 15, 20 years, again, you'll be at lifespan of those things. So hope is okay. But irrational budgeting, which says that a new museum is going to get 250,000 people a year to visit your community, that's just not working with the right consultant. That's just not being honest with yourself.
Yeah, and I also feel it's a little bit, I've been thinking a lot. I sort of geek out over a lot of tech podcasts because I just find the tech industry really fascinating. And, this sort of all that's been happening with the with SVB and this, that basically, the Times recently had an article about it was the end of basically faking it till you make it in that industry. And I think that some of that exists, in the same way when venture capitalists are engaging in those companies. I think that there's a similar thing happening when people are fundraising for buildings, right? They're sort of selling a dream, and very often that dream can maybe distract from, the realities of what is needed. So I think to that point, so one of the things, Cyrus teaches courses at Virginia Tech, an arts administration course, and he had a student, Liz Gray, do an analysis. And I was wondering, Cyrus, if you could share a little bit about what Liz found, because I think as we're speaking to individuals or communities that are thinking of engaging in a project like this, what should they have to be successful?
Yeah. So she looked at structure similar to Jefferson Center, which is a historic theater or performance space belonging to the city or county that it was in, but managed by a separate 501c3, and in some cases a LLC aligned for tax credit benefit, as we kind of sort of talked through already. And she did an analysis of 9 of those, comparing level of community public support and comparison, sort of like a benchmarking or ranking of all these organizations. Now, each of these, of course, are at different different part in their lifespan too, right? But and then she did interviews with specific examples where she got narrative from the executive directors or artistic directors about exactly what it felt like to work in an organization. It's not going to be a surprise to anybody. Organizations that started with a rational funding model that said, well, I can see that you're trying to run a 100,000 square foot building here, and it's going to take $250,000 a year to keep up. So we're going to donate to that. Or a rational funding model where the public entity said, we can see that it's going to cost a lot to operate this building. We're going to make sure there's a line item to pay for that. We also think that you're going to need underwriting if we want to get Lyle Lovett or Wynton Marsalis in this community every year.
There's an understanding of what that cost is.
Yeah, so we're also donating it. We're giving an additional $250,000 a year for $500,000 a year every year. Or the third option, which is really what public entities assume was going to happen, is an angel investor gives $10 million or $20 million to an endowment, which basically does the same thing over time. Right. So her analysis is again, benchmarking what the realities are for these organizations based on the level of funding they might be receiving from the public side or what size their endowment is. Again, this does happen, right? A group of people in a small town decide to save a historic theater, and they start with endowment funding. This thing doesn't start being built until we have 5 times its annual capital need in the bank. And then we're going to start fundraising for the other side. That is actually the way you should do it. I will say, though, based on instinct and not necessarily analysis, many of these would not get built, and they just wouldn't get saved.
Yeah, we were when we were going through the historic tax credit process, and there was a moment where we were looking into new market tax credits too, because there had been a point where new markets were going to historic theater renovations if they fell into an area that could be considered an area that was below the had I can't remember what the metric what the principles are, but basically you're in an area that's poor, struck by poverty. So this was, our zip code did fall into that category, but what we found is that they weren't issuing new market tax credits anymore because all of these theaters had gone belly up, right? They had invested in them and then they didn't work and they went belly up and they were done. And I just want to sort of stress to anybody getting ready, and this is not to tell anybody not to do it. I think people should definitely strive to repurpose buildings, renovate historic landmarks, and particularly theaters and performance spaces where the arts can happen. I think it's critical right now. Obviously, it's a big part of our job and why we get up every morning to do it. But you have to take seriously how difficult. It's not Field of Dreams. You don't just build it and they come. It's just not that simple, and it's a lot more expensive than anybody thinks. Some of that's the building, and I think to what Cyrus was saying too, these artists also cost a lot more than people realize. I mean, how often, Cyrus, some member of the community tells you to bring some artist in that probably is, $500,000 to $1 million act, and asks you to bring them to your 900 seat?
Yeah, right. Every programming committee on every theater is going to have some ideas that you go, huh?
Yeah, everybody wants us to bring Dave Matthews all the time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, we'll definitely work on that. Yeah.
So maybe if it's just solo Dave Matthews, it would be fine.
Maybe.
Yeah, if he doesn't have to pay the band, right? I've heard that one before.
Yeah.
It's still going to be expensive.
Yeah, it's still going to be a little bit beyond. Yeah. So I think this is, Liz, I was able to read Liz's document, and it was really helpful, and it's become helpful to us at the Academy because we fall into this category where we own our building. I don't think there's any real prospect of public funding at the level that Cyrus and I just shared that is probably really necessary to come from local government to sustain an organization over time. And so we now have to really be really aggressive on our endowment. I will say that the good news was that this was always a conversation that was happening as we were fundraising for the theater. So it was there and it was discussed, and there were individuals that were certainly aware that it was going to be necessary. And we also had this weird circumstance in which the organization was operating in a portion of the facility that had already been renovated a couple of decades or 15 years prior. So this organization, the Academy Center of the Arts, or the Academy of Fine Arts at the time, was still operating, trying to maintain a budget, was navigating all of that, and then trying to fundraise for a giant theater. The idea and that theater just scraped through, right? The funding for it was just what it needed to be. But there was a lot of discussion at the time of we probably should be raising money for the endowment at the same time. And if I could turn back time and do anything, right? And I don't know if it would have been possible, if we would have been capable. We might have, maybe a little bit, halfway of what we think we need the endowment to be, which we think needs to be probably about $10 million. And it sits right now at about $3 million. But now that's going to be the focus of my leadership over the next, few years, is going to be about getting that endowment up. My attention won't necessarily be on, program development, and, it will be at points, but I think it's the thing to know is arts organizations, like the leader, will be very focused on fundraising.
Yeah. Oh, no question. Particularly
right?
In a historic theater.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when there's, infrastructure, which is interesting too, because if really our job, the thing that we can really do anything about, is culture, which I believe more and more, the more I've been doing this, it's the only thing I can really do.
Yeah.
Is build culture and support an environment where people feel good about their work, feel successful and are resourced, and there's sort of a way forward together. That's an interesting thing, right? That what they're seeing me do every day is really, advocate with the city of Roanoke for coming up with the sort of funding necessary to save the building, right? It's me going out and having a conversation about infrastructure, and I think that's good in the sense that we need a space to do the work that we do. As we know, that's why we're doing it.
Yeah.
It's probably bad in the sense that it feels like, and I heard this years ago in our last campaign, it feels like the focus has become on money,
Yeah.
and not the art.
Yeah.
The focus is on what we need to do to update the line array or sound system. So, Father John Misty or a really modern tour feels like we're a place that they could come and do their work because we've got the right system there to support them. So I don't know. It's an interesting combination of challenges. I'm getting philosophical now.
No, it's
okay.
good. I don't mind the philosophical actually, but as you, I want to go there because I think what the good news is I think on the podcast we're gonna have time to actually do that, which is good. But and I think that's one of the things I really value about our conversation. So I do want to get some of that in here. But before we go, talk a little bit about how you're strategizing and thinking about what you're going to do right now. Because I've been intrigued by some of the ideas that you have sort of floated out there about what you're going to try to do to solve this issue that you have. And there's also some dynamics right now that you have with local politics and things going on within the city. And there's a new city manager, correct, too?
He's not 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if I can claim to have any fully fleshed out strategy. Again, I'm going to give you a philosophical answer here too, which is the more I've done this, the more I realize, this belief that people have about us that we're going to come up with a creative idea that generates excess earned and contributed revenue is going to solve it all. I've been making a mistake of allowing people to believe that about me. Right? Like, I'm not going to come tomorrow, not going to go up, hike the Appalachian Trail for 6 hours and come back and go, I've got it.
I've got it figured it out.
I got it figured out. If we just do touring mail strip reviews, we're going to always have enough money coming in the house that we never have to talk about whether we can pay for the roof when it needs to be replaced. Those ideas are not going to happen.
Yeah.
What my job is to, and this is what we're doing in answer to your question in a more practical way, we're doing the analysis. We're doing a feasibility that represents what the philanthropic community can support.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, we're building the copy, the narrative necessary to advocate with the philanthropic community, but also the city of Roanoke. We did a full capital needs assessment. We looked at the 5, 10, 15, and 20-year capital weight of operating that building and the cost to do it. Both maintenance, meaning how many staff should you have? Well, it turns out we've got 1 full-time building manager and we should have 3 full-time, right?
Yeah.
And then also on the capital, on the expenditure side, on capital expenditures, right? So there's the maintenancing the building at this amount. Here's the stuff you need to come up with in the short term and the likely weight of operating the building over the next 20 years. The most interesting part is these often, we benefit from having board members who work in the for-profit sector most often. They're the ones that are somewhat frightened to look at that analysis, right? They wouldn't buy my building as a developer and say, well, that makes all the sense in the world. I'm clearly going to break even on this thing over 15 years and then sell it, benefiting from the tax depreciation over that period and sell it at a profit in 15 years, right? So, that's the other thing we're doing. But we're also, I'm fulfilling what I think my role is to provide the analysis, to be really transparent and ethical and make sure the numbers are right.
Yeah.
They're right.
Yeah.
This isn't dramatic. This isn't hyperbole. This isn't me padding the numbers with hopes that we can get money in the door to do these creative projects we've been always dying to do. It's not that, right? So I am providing analysis and providing what I think the solutions are. It is 100% up to the community, the city of Roanoke, city council, city manager, and the broader philanthropic community to decide if they want to save it or not.
Yeah. Well, Cyrus and I have talked a lot about, how our own personal careers are sometimes pitted against the duties of leading these organizations, right? That, and I firmly believe Cyrus is doing the right thing. I think what he should do right now is present the reality, even if it's not a reality that probably everybody, anybody wants to see or really deal with. But it is what it is, and has to be dealt with if the dream of the Jefferson Center is going to be realized, and if it's going to continue on past that. We're talking about this for 20 years and we're going to stop. It's like, no, we want it to keep going. We don't want it to become the Lynchburg Fine Arts Center, right? That becomes a parking lot. But I think there's a very often a common circumstance where arts leaders there's self-preservation. I'll make it. I'll get through this next budget cycle. We'll balance the budget. We'll ignore that thing. We'll patch it together. I'll get to the point where I get another job offer, and then I'll leave in 3 years, and I won't be there when the ship actually goes down. And I think that there's a lot of leaders out there who are actually very aware that they're on sinking ships. They're very, very hyper aware of it. And they jump off these ships and move on to another job. And then some other poor soul ends up inheriting this thing. And so I think the best thing you can do for the organization, the best thing you can do for your community is doing exactly what Cyrus is doing, and basically saying, this is the reality of it. For us, we're, again, if I'm, anybody who's got a new building out there, a new facility, and you don't have a circumstance in which there is public funding to help support that building, or you don't have a very large endowment, it has to be brought forward. And I think a lot about posterity. I think about the history of this building and our commitment to it. And I think about legacy. And I think, more and more I've been thinking my legacy isn't necessarily that we renovated the thing. My legacy is going to be setting up a circumstance where the next person who comes in after me is going to have a circumstance that's not going to sink them.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is the work. This is going to sound kind of like too put together, but it turns out it's really character work, not creative work. Someone's going to be honest with people and do the hard work of providing the analysis, right? That's my job. It's really a character game. It's not creativity that's going to solve it in the long term. Yes, you want to come up with new ideas. Yes, you want to take a risk on a show that no one thought would work on a Monday night. Yes, you want to say maybe, doing some bookings in the amphitheater in our small town can increase the size of what we're doing. Sure, some of that risk makes sense, but a lot of it really doesn't.
Yeah, and we keep coming to, so we generate new ideas relatively frequently in regards to the programs that we deliver. And what I'm finding right now as we generate these new ideas is that the ideas are worth doing from a mission perspective. And many of the ideas end up, I think, creating a scenario in which they're valuable enough that they're it's self-sufficient. The financial work in terms of supporting the staff that are executing that mission, and that mission in turn provides a little bit more value within the community that then allows us to raise some more dollars. So we have found that has been effective, but it doesn't really solve the problem we're talking about. And so I think when we say that, Cyrus is supposed to go hike to the top of a mountain and come back with some idea, there are ideas you can come back with that may help diversify revenue streams, may sort of help with how you're connecting the community in new ways. And I wouldn't discourage anybody from doing that. I think you should. But the problems that we're talking about in terms of like facility depreciation is just so much bigger than anything you're going to, like we're just getting ready to launch a new online art sales division. And it's called Artistica, and it has a staff member who's dedicated to it. And one of our revenue sources is art sales. And so we're hoping we can enter into a national market with this. When I look at it, this is not going to solve my building problems.
No. It is cool though.
It's going to be cool.
Yeah.
It's going to be cool. And we're hopeful that it will support the artists in the community regionally. This is going to give them a larger platform. I think it is also helpful to our story, right? And the evolution of the organization, et cetera. But it is not going to stop that building from falling apart over time, is not going to pay for a new HVAC system. It's just not. It's
Yeah.
going to continue the mission and it's going to serve, but it's not going to solve. And I will share really quickly too. I also had a circumstance, and I think we talked about this, Cyrus, where we were going through our last budget cycle with the board, and somebody asked the question of, essentially kind of pushing on whether we could generate more earned revenue. And to your point about the Magic Mike show or whatever, right? I think maybe there's some sort of commercial way to do it, maybe, but I was like, that's not who you hired. That's not what I do, right? I'm not going to do the prices right every weekend here. And I don't think that was what the community want when they built this, right? You didn't want a casino.
Right.
So if you want a casino, maybe they did. Maybe some do. I don't know, but I think that's, but then again, too, this is also this collision, right? Where if you were going to be a for-profit entity, you'd be a for-profit entity and you'd run it that way. But these aren't set up to be for-profit.
Well, I mean, that's an important point because, the nonprofit sector exists formalized in the tax structure to provide a service that the public sector is not prepared or interested in providing, nor is the private sector prepared or interested in providing. That's why it exists, right? Anybody can run a casino, it turns out. But very few people can figure out how to structure the long-term capital infrastructure health of a historic theater and also program inside of it in a way that's intelligent and dynamic and serves the greater artistic purposes and provides beauty in people's lives. It's a very, very complicated thing. I do want to mention, you mentioned the budgeting. And that one mistake that we had made for years is we had sort of a cash-based, it was really accrual budget, right? And there was all this focus at those board meetings about, how's the P&L, progress to goal. What we weren't capturing on our P&L was the depreciation and the weight of the building.
Yeah.
And frankly, I, for 5 or 6 years, thought I was doing pretty good. I was like, man, I'm like within 1% variance to the operating budget every year. Yep. I must be a genius. It's me. I'm totally doing this. And then we started thinking about it. Wait a minute. If the depreciation is represented in our our June 30th statement, in our case, fiscal year, to June 30th, we need to start representing that as a true weight in our operating budget and our P&L, right? Because very few board members and frankly, executive directors are going to be able to think of the balance sheet as being the leading document. But really the balance sheet is the leading document. It tells you where you are in terms of asset strength and whether or not there's liquidity enough to handle something like a pandemic or a catastrophic issue in your building. So that's one practical suggestion is work with your financial manager and make sure the weight of operating the building is fully represented.
It has to be. Yeah. If it doesn't, then, I think, I was doing the exact same thing, Cyrus, when I first entered into this job. It's just the P&L. It's just the P&L, and exactly. Oh, good. We made it. We made it this month. We made it this month, and I think that's so common. And then suddenly, something breaks down, and you're like, oh my God. And this is not just in the arts sector too. I mean, I will share. I know that one of our social service partner organizations, they run a heavy after school weekend program, and they have facilities, and they had their HVAC system go down, and they had to make calls out to donors to just have enough cash to fix this, right? So they can continue to do their services. So clearly they had also not planned for facility maintenance issues and things breaking down. They weren't liquid enough to cover it. So this is really, really common. I think I want to, in the last bit of the podcast here, one of the things I've really enjoyed your perspective on, and this I think still kind of comes to the building because we're running art centers, and we're serving communities similar in size. What's Roanoke's population now?
So the city's 100,000,
okay.
But the MSA is 250,000.
Right. And Lynchburg is about 80 and about 220.
Okay.
So we're very similar in size. Roanoke's a little bit larger, and we house a lot of other arts organizations within our facilities. And then we intersect a ton with all of the other arts organizations that exist in our ecosystems in a very small community. I want you, if you would be willing, I'd love for you to share a little bit of your thoughts on what a community with 100,000 people, right, or 80 to 100,000 people, what is it able to support, right? How much arts and culture can it actually support? Is it limitless? Does it, is it circumstantial? I'd be curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, first, I'd say that, sometimes we forget that the arts exist within the free market, right? Within the system that we have.
Yeah.
So some of it does happen organically. The historic movie house that finds that right balance of the type of movies it wants to present, and maybe even has a small subscriber base that says, I'm going to pay you $500 once a year to come to everything you're doing. And you've got 100 people who decide to do that because they care about you, right? And then you're like generating some real income off of what you're programming, that that there's places that are going to figure that out. But there's also the fear that there's, quite a bit of redundancy in what different organizations are doing. So my concern about market size in the free market is at some point people do have to have a conversation about redundancy. I think I just said the same thing twice. Sorry, but
No.
Yeah,
but supply and demand.
Yeah,
right?
it really is supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
There's there's not necessarily an existential crisis. It does feel existential because we care about it, but honestly, it's really just supply and demand, and that's going to work out over time. So I do know as arts leaders, we have to be beyond reproach in terms of the way we operate, because people will find a reason not to support you if they can. I mean, that's a really dark way to say it. Another way to say that, half glass full, would be people will always look to support you when you're doing good work. I think I mean that actually, but it's a free market. So the free market will decide how much can be supported, both in terms of earned revenue, i.e. ticket sales, and how much philanthropy exists. And over time, the community that you're in is going to have to conversation about redundancy. And if it doesn't, then there will be organizations that are ailing. My guess, 3 years in start of pandemic to basically now, that we're at a stage where a lot of that federal support has been spent out. Organizations are trying to make sense of a business plan where they ramped up their programming and they hired, and they're now having to right size. What's going to be painful is the level of right sizing necessary over the next couple of years for all presenting and program production. Anybody trying to make artwork happen, and that's probably theater companies, it's opera companies, it's symphonies, it's children's theater, it's presenting houses. At some point, the reconciliation is right sizing, and I don't know. I know that we are figuring it out in the music environment. People are buying tickets. But we're just to, not to over celebrate here, we're doing 30 concerts a year. We're not doing 300 concerts a year. So for my market, 30 concerts is about the sweet spot.
Yeah. Yeah, we do 24 to 30 national touring a year too. Yeah. So we're right in that.
Yeah. And then the other 120 nights we're busy are community partners doing their work in our spaces.
Us as well.
Yeah. But it really is about supply and demand and being clear on yourself. The biggest mistake that I've seen young musicians make, but the biggest mistake that arts organizations make too, is over projecting demand because they care about it.
Yeah. This sends me back to, we had a little bit of a conversation around, you had begun some conversations about the potential of utilizing historic tax credits. So I know you spoke with a professional that we dealt with in Lynchburg, Laura Dupuy, who was helpful to us in our historic tax credit process. And I remember that there was a consultant that was brought in to help create the business model. And in a previous podcast, we actually talked about, I've always wondered with the financial model that he created for this thing, and it always felt to me that it really wasn't realistic. Like our market size and the ability to sort of basically be selling out the theater like every single show just always just was like, yeah, this is not right. And I remember thinking as it was moving through that process, I remember thinking, we'll push this forward, right? So they can close this deal or whatever, but we're going to have to figure something else out when this comes back because there's just no way that's going to work.
Right. And then you got to think about the fact it takes you in the nonprofit sector 2 years, 3 years to build a new brand, a new identity, a new branding. But really, in truth, we need to be flexible enough to change annually.
Yeah.
It's a weird and strange business. And you can lose people, as you know, as donors or as subscribers or as ticket buyers quickly.
Yeah.
One less than stellar experience, there are lots of other options, which then I go back to redundancy again. And we've talked about this, a little less redundancy in Lynchburg. In Roanoke's case, we do have a historic movie house and theater that's doing some live music now. We have we have a major civic center with, 3 or 4 different venues. We've got other music venues. We've got the Harvester pretty close to us, which is a 420-seat music venue, 30-minute drive. So I call them redundancies rather than competitors, because if we're all nonprofits, with most are, being operated by the public sector, we're going to have to figure out a way to fund them all, or just very clearly some are going to have to go away, right? It just won't make sense it wouldn't make sense to me personally and professionally to have 5 organizations operating under-resourced and with low quality. It makes more sense to have 2 or 3 that are just killing.
They're just doing really great job.
Doing really, really good work.
Yeah.
Now, there's some efficiencies there. These same efficiencies that people always tell us should exist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, why don't you have a box office and this organization has a box office? Why don't you be one box office? You know what I always say? I was like, well, in Roanoke, we've got a Lowe's and we've got a Home Depot, and they're right across the street from each other. So why don't they work together and just have one checkout line, right? They're all checking out hammers and shovels. So why do you guys both paying 2 different people? Now, of course, the answer would be the guys we do have sitting in these checking people out are already overwhelmed. It would be the same for us.
Yeah.
My box office is really at capacity in terms of what it's already doing. It's having a hard time monitoring and managing the amount of inflow it has, and the ability to talk to 100 events in our building every year with competence and confidence.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if I got to the heart of your question.
I think you did.
The redundancies in a community.
Yeah, I think you did. And I, we've talked a lot about this. We have this situation in Lynchburg right now where a large outdoor amphitheater is being built, and Roanoke has gone through this, and you have had some involvement at various points in that amphitheater there in Roanoke. And for us, one of my initial thoughts was, oh man, we have to get control of that, right? Because this is going to be, some sort of competitor, right? We've got to be the people who are running this, right? And I've actually gotten further and further from that over time, and it's not necessarily. I do think that there is definitely a need for something like that culturally in the community. But I'm also realizing from going through the experience of running the facility that we have and executing the shows that we do, I'm not sure our city is ready for that amphitheater. And, this podcast is going to go out, and I don't know if, anybody in our local government will listen to it, but I'm not, it's really expensive. And I don't think anybody realizes like how expensive this is. And when we really started doing the analysis of the number of full-time employees that we would need to take on to handle the additional box office flow, the production staff that would be necessary for doing outdoor concerts, all the front of house team that would be needed to execute outdoor concerts.
Plus the rehiring you'd have to do as people realized that they had to be outside 6, 7
yep.
shows.
They're like, I'm out of here.
I'm not doing that.
I'm not doing this anymore.
Right.
This is, and so you're constantly going to be churning through people. And then the financial risk is massive, right? If you're bringing people outside and you're trying to sell 3,000 to 5,000 tickets or whatever that I think that park will hold, The acts have to be at a certain level, but that's also that 3,000 to 5,000 is also really tricky. And it's really tricky.
Yeah.
And so who's paying for that? Who's fronting that cash?
And I think one of my answers was, if your venue's 800 seats and you're thinking about expanding to operate 4,000 or 5,000, whatever underwriting the city of Lynchburg should be providing to you today, and they're not, it would be that times 5.
Yeah.
Right. You'd have to go from that amount and just pad to it. I will give you a quick funny anecdote.
Yeah.
Someone called recently. I may have told you this already, but I'll say it on here. And said, "Listen, I'm going to do Darius Rucker in Elmwood Park." And I was like, I don't know. And he told me the fee. I was like, I don't think that makes any money. I don't think that's right. I wouldn't do that show. And you want to work with me? And I was like, no, we're not really mechanized to do outdoor shows anymore. We did the opening shows in Elmwood Park, but we're just not there. And I just didn't believe it at the artist fee. Went on sale, sold out in 6 hours. He netted $80K. Netted above artist fee $80K in hours. It's like, in my world, that could be 2 full-time positions that I lost out on an opportunity to fund because I wasn't involved in it.
But it's such a roll of the dice, though. To your point, there's so much risk, and I think that we've been really thinking about, can we really risk the long-term health of the organization over this park experiment? Mm. And the answer is yes, if there's public support there to pay the costs that would exist. If we really want this as a public service, then we can't expect the nonprofit institution to go belly up, over it. There's just a certain level of financial commitment that we're already not meeting, right, in regards to taking care of our building that we have to address. And then the idea of going out in that park now I'm not saying we wouldn't do it, right? I'll say that here on this podcast. We'd be happy to do it if the proper funds were supplied. But I don't think that there's the appetite politically right now in our community to do that. And so, maybe somebody else will come in. Maybe there'll be an outside promoter who wants to take it on. And I actually personally, being a citizen of Lynchburg, I hope there is. I hope there is somebody who comes in and commercially takes it on, because I would love to have outdoor concerts to go to.
Right.
But I'm not in a space where our organization's not in a space where I'm going to risk, right, our future on it. And it's funny. And I came to that initially when I was thinking like, oh, I've got, it's like acquisition. I've got to I've got to have this empire. We've got to control this, or this is all going to tear us down. And I didn't end up there in the end.
I think I might have even mentioned the benefit to us of the few shows we did do. We did opening night there with Sheryl Crow. We've done, some shows for this gentleman I talked about, doing Darius Rucker. And a few of our own shows is really the database, the email list.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's been the benefit to us, as a lot of those people have still hung on, and we can promote to them the stuff we're doing. So box office, the argument could be, I don't know, I'm just thinking out of the box here, but the argument could be, even if a for-profit promoter comes in and operates the park, still try to be the box office for it.
Yeah. And actually, that did actually come up as a potential model. When we were talking to city management, that did come up. And I would be open to that. If they said to us, listen, we have this third party promoter. They want to come in. They want to handle the artist side. You're here on the ground. Will you handle front of house and box office? I think we might consider that if the FTs were covered and we felt like, I think we would consider that.
It's a good way to go.
Yeah.
Just a quick, just say this out loud so that you don't run into the same problem we did. They didn't think to create Wi-Fi structure in our. Yeah. You got to have Wi-Fi, it turns out, to sell tickets.
We actually have produced shows in that park before. And we've invested in a number of, and that's the thing too, is that we did think, and I'll share this really fast, I think as we wrap up, we did think that the fact that they're building the infrastructure, for us, we had always sort of had in our head, well, when we were producing those concerts, we had to bring in temporary staging and all the sound systems and equipment and porta potties and all this stuff. And we thought, well, if they're going to build the infrastructure, then we're going to end up probably being in pretty good shape because we're not spending all of that money. But in the end, the biggest cost is the artist, and the risk is with the artist. And so I just
the weather.
And the weather.
Yeah.
And so I just came back to like, yeah, man, this is way, way, way too risky for us to not do this without financial support. So I think to bring this all the way back around again, I think when we're talking about the the public investment in these projects, right? If you're working on a project like this and you're renovating a theater and you're structuring it for the future, there's two options here, right? The city government, right, needs to commit to supporting that building if they own it, and at the very least supplying the necessary money for upkeep and keep up with depreciation. And if you own the building, then you must have an endowment, right, that's sizable and large enough to help you navigate those buildings and those spaces.
And it can be both,
And it could be both. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I sent you this, but I saw what do you call it, prospectus from a consultant who a community had hired them. I just found this kind of searching for historic theater structure stuff. And the consultant's report was 85 pages long, and it said to this community, whether you operate as a 501c3 or whether it continues to belong to the city, whatever it is, this is the known loss. Again, I think I used that at the beginning of the podcast, but this is the known loss. However it's structured, if you don't want to have a empty building that you're trying to figure out what to do with in downtown, either way, the city's going to have to support it. It's going to have to happen that way.
Yeah, and that's a great point to bring up, right? Because at the end of the day, right, and if let's use the Academy for example, we own our building, right? If something were to happen to us, and I've said this very often, I always think the thing at risk is actually the Academy Center of the Arts, the 501c3, not the Academy Historic Theater, right? Like this historic theater's $30 million, project. This building is massive. It's a huge, iconic building in the city. Like the city would still have to deal with it, right? There's that, like the building will still be there. And so really what we're talking about is our ability to, now granted, I don't know how well it would be taken care of or what kind of program it would look like, but they would have to navigate and deal with that building. It would be sitting there right in the center of their downtown, and they have to deal with it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
As a wrap up, Cyrus, one of the things I always like to ask guests is just any advice you have for anybody out there running an organization in a smaller community, that you could provide insight. Obviously, I think we spent a lot of time talking about the difficulties that we face, but I think that we didn't even get into the programs at the Jefferson Center, which are absolutely phenomenal. And it is a fantastic organization. An organization, quite frankly, that shouldn't be saddled by this facilities maintenance, right? This is something that should be taken care of by the community. But you obviously have been doing a fantastic job, and I think you're a great role model for many out there. What advice might you give to somebody in a smaller market community working in the arts?
Thank you. Thank you for the positive take on what we're doing, and I think what I'm trying to figure out how to do. I don't know. I'll do a couple. One would be sort of a relationship with your board. One of my biggest lessons was realizing that the board governance versus board management, that is not a fixed thing. At this point in my career, anytime the board decides it wants to be more involved in what I would have said felt like a management role, something I should be doing, that I just see that as engagement now.
Yeah,
I think I shared that with you. Like if you feel
that's an important thing.
Yeah, if you feel like you're being patronized, don't forget it has the word patron or patron in it.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So that honestly is, important because we're protecting ourselves in this work, and we have to think of our board as being the most likely source of the motivating energy necessary for us to succeed. So never think of something as being clearly black and white governance management. Secondly, I would say to people that there will be moments where you feel clearly that you've lost your mooring, that you're no longer sure of where you're supposed to be going, and that's a completely normal feeling. And the way back to that, which is, again, this is so obvious, I know to a lot of people who do this all the time, really is strategy, right?
Yeah.
Revert back to the strategy. Say, listen, and you're going to have board members, and I did, and I still probably do, that say, I am not sitting in a room and talking about strategy for 4 hours, And I get that too. Nonprofits are guilty of not necessarily doing that in the most efficient way for their board members and stakeholders. At the same time, reverting back to strategy and reminding yourself that there is a plan to follow can be a very healthy way.
And comforting.
And comforting. Yeah, it really is comforting. And then I guess lastly, something I've already mentioned, which is it really is a character game. It's not a gosh, I just wish I was better at creative thinking, right? Like I don't know about you, Jeff. You may be indeed a true visionary of the arts.
I don't know about that.
But
got a lot of energy.
Yeah, right. But this idea that somehow we're sitting in these arts organizations and these buildings, constantly envisioning a better future. We do that in a way to be helpful about thinking about how we can be better in the future. But what we're really doing is trying to display the level of character necessary to do it well, to do it ethically and do it transparently, and give to the work a level of professionalism that our community doesn't naturally give us because of the perception that the nonprofit sector is somehow soft business.
Or there's also a perception, not necessarily with the donors and the board members, but the perception too that you're rolling in money, right? Do you get that ever?
I'm not sure if I've ever gotten that.
We get that sometimes. I think because the theater is new.
Oh.
Has like
Yeah, it's shiny.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not so shiny.
Okay. On that note.
Right.
Well, I mean, I will say, for listeners, one of the things I wanted to give everybody is that I have really cherished Cyrus's insight on many levels. But one of the things that's been really helpful is it is looking into the future. And I would say to anybody who has a building, is in the early stages of something, really keep this in mind and think about legacy and think about the long-term implications of the building. And if you are in Cyrus's situation, then give him a call and commiserate a little bit.
I'd also like to say my eternal appreciation for meeting with you every 2 weeks. It's been a big part of the last few years for me. And I'd like to just tell everyone that in January of 2020, Jeff said, this virus thing, it might end up being a real thing. And I said to myself, and I may have said it, unfortunately, to you, I was like, I just don't buy it. I don't think it's going to do much.
I was getting a lot of that from people, though. I was definitely, it was like one of those moments where me being an anxious person was suddenly a superpower.
Right.
And normally it's not a superpower. Well, I mean, it's debilitating.
But. Yeah, right. I did some planning that I probably wouldn't have done without your advice that clearly helped us make sense of the panic of that.
Well, I will also share really quickly. I really encourage people to find colleagues to connect with. It can be a lonely, isolating scenario being a leader in an organization and dealing with the circumstances that we, just discussed, all the things that we are subject matter in the podcast. But finding colleagues that you can regularly connect to and talk to, realize you're not alone is also really beneficial. And there's a lot of us out there. So, it's not probably too hard to find if you just look. I remember Cyrus just showed up in Lynchburg. Well, you set up an appointment, but he came to visit us, and that really started this pre-COVID. And so reach out, go visit people, see other organizations, and get beyond your own community. Well, Cyrus, with that, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate this. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Small Town Big Arts. Remember to rate and review us and share with your friends. To learn more, visit us at smalltownbigarts.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Jeffrey Kirshner.